Okay, everyone, we'll do a few things today. I want to finish up talking about Malcolm Gladwell, and then we'll take a look at some of the Little Seagull, and then we'll look at some previous papers from other classes, and we can do kind of a little bit of an editing exercise. So we left off when I showed you that video where he talks about how the story of David and Goliath is kind of a metaphor for modern life, actually. And we'll kind of take a look at some examples of these. Okay, so first of all, and the power of the underdogs. So what's interesting is that when a lot of these historians, they look at wars, and it's kind of a subjective thing as to who is the quote unquote weaker side versus the stronger side. But in general, what they find is that the weaker side, when they do things that are unconventional, they win 64% of the time, meaning that they try new tricks, they try to do things that are unique, they try to do things that the enemy was not expecting, they try to catch them off guard, things like that. They actually will win the majority of the time compared to the stronger side. And then even when they don't, they still win a lot because we see this all the time with sports where you have a team that's going to be the overwhelming favorite. And what happens? They underestimate the enemy. In fact, just yesterday, I heard on the radio the famous coach Jimmy Johnson. He was even talking about when he coached the Cowboys, he had some great teams. And during the weeks where they were going to be facing some other really strong opponents, he didn't really have to kind of drill them too much. But because he knew that they would play well, they would play up to the level. But whenever they were playing an opponent that was perceived to be a huge underdog, he made sure to really get after his players to make sure that they didn't underestimate their opponent. Because as we see here, a lot of times the stronger team can lose if they don't take the opponent seriously. What is the psychology behind this? Exactly that. If you're the underdog, don't always view yourself as an underdog. Now, let me ask you guys this. Do you think that money equates into happiness? What do you guys think about that? Does money equal happiness? Okay, Carrie says no. Hunter says no. Yeah, I mean, what they find is that it does for a while, but there's sometimes a downward spiral that goes along with it. In fact, there's this term in psychology called the immigration or immigrants to wealth. When we say immigrants, we're not talking about people that move from different countries. We're using that as a metaphor. But when you have people that grow up in maybe a poor background or even a middle class background, and then all of a sudden they become extremely wealthy, they're not always equipped to handle that. I mean, just think, for example, in the music industry. I mean, how many rich people, how many people we think had it all end up committing suicide or getting into drugs and so forth? So it's one of these things that, and what kind of an analogy that I think Gladwell and also who he interviewed and who he took this term for is a guy named, I forget his first name offhand, but I think his last name is Gruber. And what he says is that it's kind of an analogy. Think of it this way. Think of if you're on an island and you're an island of poverty and you see in the distance another island of extreme wealth. Well, the problem sometimes is that we, on the island of poverty, we just swim and swim for that island of wealth. But once we get there, we never really thought about what we would do with it. And that's why you see so many stars, so many musicians, so many just tragic figures that go along that path where they become wealthy all of a sudden and it's just almost too much money thrown in their face and they don't know how to deal with it. And it leads to depression in a lot of cases and so forth. Now, let me ask you this. How do you guys feel about class size? Do you prefer larger classes or smaller classes or okay, Valerie says smaller. Carrie says smaller. Shaylin says smaller. Yeah, I mean, the thing is too with larger classes, like when I had my bachelor's degree, and the very first semester that I ever took in college, I get there the first day of class, and it turns out that there's literally 300 people in my class. Okay, and in fact, that we couldn't even use the auditorium because it couldn't fit everybody. So literally, we could take the class, or we could watch the class on TV because they had their own TV network, and because they just simply didn't have enough people to sit in the auditorium. And of course, when you have large classes like that, the disadvantage, of course, is that you don't get to meet your fellow classmates, and it just seems kind of really distant. Like you don't get to talk to your professor one on one if you have questions and things like that. So that's pretty much something that we all agree on. But what do you think the issue is with smaller classes? Like, what are some of the good things? What are some of the bad things? Like, start with the good things. What are some of the good things with the small class? Any ideas? I mean, I think we could probably all agree. Well, you get to know your classmates a lot, and that you become best friends by the end of graduation. If you, I mean, depending on what your degrees are and so forth. So that's the advantage of a small class. But what do you think some of the disadvantages of a small class might be? Any ideas? Well, the problem is that when you have larger classes, that you don't really get to hear everybody or meet everybody in your class, and sometimes that can be annoying. And sometimes it just seems that, oh well, your college is just trying to pack as many people as there's possible to make the most money. The problem with small classes, though, like really small classes, is that you're not getting too much of a variety of opinions when you have class discussion, because you only have, like, in some cases, you might only have like 4 or 5 people in your class. Well, there might be a lot of different perspectives about whatever you're talking about, but you're only getting about 3 or 4 people. What they find a lot with education is that there's what they call an inverted U curve, which means that too small of a class leads to less diversity. Sometimes poor people need more around them to learn from, and too large is too difficult to manage and it becomes very cluttered and so forth. So it's kind of like an in between. I think in the book, Gladwell says that when he interviews teachers, they say that their ideal number is about 22 per class or something like that, maybe 24, something like that. If you get too low, then as it says, you don't get as much diversity of opinion, and sometimes poor people, or sometimes poor students need more people around them to learn from. And then if it gets too large, it just becomes a situation where you can't possibly hear from everybody because the discussion would go on forever, right? Now, does choosing the better college translate into greater success, quote unquote better? And I have some slides coming up. I have some stats to show you that is really mind boggling, but we'll get to that. So here's the thing. Gladwell interviews a lot of students in this book, and he interviews them. Of course, they're not using their real names; they're using pseudonyms. And a lot of these students went to Ivy League schools, or just some of the top schools in the country. Like Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, University of Michigan, so forth. And what's interesting is that when he interviews them, a lot of them have dropped out, and they did really well in high school. They were at the top of their class in high school. But what happens when they get to college, like an Ivy League college? Well, guess what? They're surrounded by other people that have been the top of their class as well. And for these students, it's like, very, very daunting because they're not used to it. Because psychologically, they were thinking that, hey, I've always done well in school. I'm going to be the best. But this is a quote. Well, this is a citation from Gladwell, but he says the teacher would ask a question, and around her, hands would go up, and Sachs, that's her pseudonym, Sachs would sit in silence and listen to everybody else's brilliant answers. It was just this feeling of overwhelming inadequacy. And that's about a student who loved the subject. I think the subject was, I don't know, math or something like that. But the fact is that she went to this Ivy League school, and now all of a sudden she's not the brilliant student anymore. So psychologically, that can have an effect. And in a lot of these STEM classes, these STEM students will end up dropping out because they take these STEM classes and they're surrounded by these brilliant minds. And you can imagine what that would do to you psychologically. And a lot of people that he interviewed, they started off doing one thing and then they either dropped out completely out of college for a while, or they just dropped their program and went on to something else. They didn't do what they loved because they were so intimidated by their classmates around them. So the psychological mindset here is that she was not comparing herself to all the students in the world taking the subject because she was a brilliant student and she had a lot of ideas and she was going to be very, very successful. But in her mind, she wasn't comparing herself to all the students in the world taking the subject. She was comparing herself to her fellow Ivy League students or, fellow students in the Ivy League. And before I forget, well, after this, I'm going to go back to our previous class for a second because there's a couple things I forgot to do that I want to show you. But anyways, though, instinctively, we have trouble breaking this mindset where psychologists call this relative deprivation. So the pressures of succeeding at the quote unquote best schools lead to academic plagiarism. We tend to think that plagiarism is a thing that's committed by only like the worst students, like the bad writers, the students who just don't want to work hard, etc. Well, that's true. That is true that you have that whole class. But at the same time, you also, believe it or not, have some of our best students that are guilty of plagiarism. Why? Because there's all this pressure on them to try to equal what their peers are doing. And instead of, even though they could write great papers themselves, they're always trying to do even better. And they feel this pressure and they've been guilty of plagiarism. There was one case that I read about where this one student at one of these schools, I forget which one off, it may have been Notre Dame, to be honest. I think it may have been Notre Dame, but I'm not sure. But anyways, though, the point is that this student was a really great student, but she plagiarized this one paper. And it was a brilliant paper, but she used it for one of her classes. Now, the professor didn't catch it right away. I mean, they should have, but they didn't catch it right away. But it was so well written that the professor ended up showing it to her colleagues. And one of her colleagues spotted this and said, you know what, this looks familiar. I think this is plagiarized. And sure enough, the student got caught. So even students at the highest level are guilty of plagiarism a lot of times. Also, when we look at suicide rates around the world, you would think that the countries that call themselves the happiest would have the least amount of suicides. Actually, it's the reverse. It turns out that the people that commit the most, or the countries that have the most suicides, are the countries that have the quote unquote most like the happiest people when they do surveys and stuff like that. It's ironic, it doesn't make sense, but it's true. And the reason is because citizens of happy countries, they look at the smiling faces around them and become depressed. And if they're going through a hard time, it even gets exasperated because it's even more depressing when you look around, you're having a hard time yourself and you're looking around and you see everybody else having a good time. It makes you feel depressed if you're already depressed anyways, right? And then students at great schools, same thing. They look at the brilliant students around them and they feel less smart than they really are. And that's tragic, but it's true though. Now, this is really fascinating. Harvard, of course, is an Ivy League school. Hartwick is just like a normal school like UCF or Florida State or Florida, things like that. So when you break down the STEM students, you break them down into thirds. If you look later on, and I'm going to show you coming up here, I'm going to show you a look at PhD publications. But if you look at, let's say that you're a student at the second tier, a student at Hartwick, you're a top-notch student though, you're in the top 1/3. You're going to tend to do a lot better than even Harvard students at their second level. So it is kind of interesting when we break this down. And what Cialdini said, or I'm sorry, what Gladwell says is that you're better off being a big fish in a small pond than a small fish in a big pond. Because this great student, she was a small fish in a big pond. She was just one of these brilliant students, and the rest of her classmates were also brilliant. But she would have been better off, and she admits this later on. She said, I would have been better off just going to a normal school. I would have gone to a Hartwick instead of a Harvard, because I would have been a big fish in a small pond, and that would have helped me, at least psychologically, to do better and to not drop out of the program, which she did. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about. This is fascinating. In the academic world, if you're a PhD student, or even right after you graduate from your PhD program, you're often judged by publications in major academic journals. I mean, once you get to a certain point in your PhD level, you're not really given grades anymore. It's like it's been established you're an A+ student, but you're evaluated on the publications that you submit to academic journals. And I'm not talking about Time Magazine, but I'm talking about peer-reviewed scholarly journals. So this is interesting when you look at these stats. Okay, now let me give me a second here. Let me just lower this for a second here. So you see up at the top here, this is the students in the 99 percentile, 95th, 90th, 85th, 80th, 75th, 70th, 65th, 60th, 50th, 55th. And same thing down here. Okay, let me just bring this back up to full screen here. Okay, now what's interesting though, these are the numbers of publications that graduates or PhD students submit during their time. So you have like at the top here, Harvard 4.31. Okay, now this makes sense because these are like the top-notch students from the top-notch schools, right? That makes sense that they would be higher. And then you have a little bit of a drop down here, drop down here. It really starts to drop when you get around here though, which I believe is, I can't see the top here, but I believe it's like, the 70th or 75th percentile. And then it gets even worse down here, and even worse down here, and worse down here, and worse down here. And you can see at the 55th percentile, which is still good if you're going to Harvard, even if you're in the 55th percentile, but you can see that they don't even publish at all. The point though is that if you look down here, like University of Toronto, Boston University, these would be like normal schools. This would be like UCF, FSU, UF, Miami, etc. And then you even take down like below that, the non-top 30. Okay, now we're talking about the average school in the country. Look at this though. If you are in the top of your class at the University of Toronto, you're doing better than what would this be? The 95th percentile at Harvard. And also, I mean, all the rest of these. So the only ones that you're not doing better in would be like the 99th percentile. And same thing with Boston University. Look, if you're in the top of their 1.59, you're doing just as good as these people in the 90th or whatever that number is. I can't see it at the top here. And even like the 90th at University of Toronto, you're still better than this group, right? You're still probably in this group. And then even if you go down here to 61, 0.61, the 85th percentile, you're still doing better than these people. So the point of all this, and then if you take the non-top 30 schools and you take a look at their PhD production in terms of publishing papers, they're doing about as good as this group. So the point is that everybody in our society has this fascination with going to these Ivy League schools, when in fact, you could have the potential to be just as good as if you went to a normal school that probably charges a lot less. Also, take a look at this. Dyslexia. What could you think of it as being a detriment? But believe it or not, a lot of people in our society are dyslexic. And the reason is that they're so successful is like you guys guess. Why would it be, or any reading disorder or anything like that, why do you think it might lead to an advantage, do you think? And you can see down here, about a third of all entrepreneurs have a reading disorder of some kind. Why do they become successful and become some of the top entrepreneurs of our time? I mean, you think of it as a disadvantage, but think about how you can turn a disadvantage into an advantage. Any guesses as to why that might be? Why you could have a reading disorder but still end up being more successful than somebody that doesn't? Okay, let me just move the chat box over here. So Hunter says they have a perspective unique to themselves alone. Okay, that could be part of it. But it's also because they have to work harder. One of the top business people that Malcolm Gladwell interviews in this book is a guy that did grow up with a reading disorder, and he had to work at it. I mean, he was really bad at reading growing up, but even says that, hey, listen, growing up, I had to work harder, and that translated into my adulthood because to be very successful, I have to work hard, and that's something that I've become used to. Okay, now this is something that I have to clarify. What Gladwell says and what these people that he interviews say is that, listen, it's not a good thing to lose a parent at a young age. Okay, nobody is saying that's a good thing. And, it's a very tragic and it's not necessarily a good thing all the time. That being said, they did this experiment where they looked at everybody in the encyclopedia. Okay, now keep in mind also that not everybody in the encyclopedia is a good person, of course. So, but nonetheless, though, it turns out that some of the most prominent people that are in the encyclopedia, if you look at them, about 25% of them lost a parent before the age of 10, about 34.5% by the age of 15, about 45% by the age of 20, and 67% of England's prime ministers by the age of 16. So the idea here is that we're not saying that losing a parent at a young age is a good thing, but at the same time, you can learn to take a good thing and turn it into an advantage. Work harder. Don't be down on yourself. Realize that it's not your fault if a parent of yours dies when you're at a young age. Okay, so this is what I wanted to talk about here. This is kind of interesting. Now, I think I teased you guys with this before last time, but this example right here. A bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Oops, lost my chat box there. Any guesses as to that? Let me move this over here for a second. So take a minute here and just read this. And just let me know what your guesses are. A bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Okay, Hunter is correct. But everybody's first reaction is 10 cents, right? Let me go ahead here and, whoops, hold on 1 second here. Yeah. So let me just do it again though, real quickly. So if you say 10 cents, so the bat would cost $1. And we'll say that the 10 cents. Now, think about this. The bat has to cost $1 more than the ball. So if the ball is 10 cents, $1 more than that would mean plus $1 equals 110. And then you have the ball, which would be another 10 cents. So the answer is 5 cents. So you have the ball that costs 5 cents. Remember, the bat costs $1 more than that, so that would be 105. That gets you to that 110. Or I'm sorry, that 110. So kind of confusing. Let me give you another one here. Okay, take a look at this one. In a lake, there's a patch of lily pads. Every day, the patch doubles in size. If it takes 48 days for the patch to cover the entire lake, how long would it take for the patch to cover half the lake? Just think about that for a second. In a lake, oh, Jose, you got it. Yeah. Have you seen that question before, or did you just get it just now? Did you just see this for the first time? Wow, good job. See, most people would say 24 because they say, well, if it takes 48, yeah, exactly. If it takes 48 for the entire lake, well, half of that would be 24 days, right? But read closely. The patch doubles in size every day. So at 48 days, if it covers the entire lake, half of that, or half of the lake, would be 47 because you go back here for a second here, because the 47th day, it's the half of the lake, double that. Remember, it doubles in size every day. So double that half of the lake, and then you get to the 48 days. So you double the 24 days. So I know it's confusing, but the point of all these, though, is that you would think that if you give these questions to students, and let me kind of explain here what they do. They give these students these exact questions that I gave you, and I mean exactly word for word. And they have two groups, and both students or both groups of students see the exact same questions. I mean, same wording and everything, but they separate the students, they separate them into groups. They give one half of the students, one group of students, the same questions in normal font, or maybe even larger font. They give the other group of students the same questions, but in smaller font. I mean, something like, something like this. Not like that, but like something like that. Now, which group do you think does better, by and large? The group that has a larger font or the smaller font? I mean, common sense would say that it would be the students that have the larger font, but it's not. The group that does better is this group that has the questions in the smaller fonts. Now, why would that be? It makes no sense, right? Why would that be, though? Any guesses? Well, the reason for that is the group that sees the questions in the smaller font, they have to pay closer attention. Their minds are paying closer attention. So the group that sees it in the larger font, they just immediately just look at the question and they answer it like normal. This is one of the advantages of, like I was saying before, about reading disorders and being well, other reading. It doesn't just have to be dyslexia, but like other reading disorders as well. They have to concentrate a lot harder than the group that sees the questions normally. So kind of interesting. So what Gladwell says is that you can turn an advantage into a disadvantage into an advantage. Okay, now in conclusion, with Gladwell, getting back to Blink, I want you to take a look at this, although here, I have to do this though. I have to make sure that you only see one bullet point at a time here. So the psychologist, he goes around, he does these word tests with people where he asks people to take a group of words and to rearrange them somehow into a sentence. Now I want to take a look at this first group of sentences here, or words here. Him was worried she always. From our Florida oranges temperature. Shoes give replace old thee. So people are told, okay, to do your best to rearrange these words so that they make sense. But that's not really what the psychologist is looking for. Does anybody notice with these three quotes right here, does anybody notice a pattern? I mean, can you pick up on a certain theme here with all these quotations? I mean, probably not. I mean, that's the point, is that you're not supposed to, but really what it has to do with old. So what would happen is that these people would rearrange these words, and they would be sitting down, rearranging the words. They'd be given a list of them, a list of questions. And then they were told that once you're done, just bring your paper up to the desk. And what the psychologists were really paying attention to, they didn't care at all about what their sentences were. What they were really paying attention to is how quickly the person got up from their desk and walked over to the administrator to hand in the test. When you give people like trigger features, trigger words, old, guess what? People tend to walk slower and they don't even know that they're doing it. And the vice versa is true. If you sort of use prime words for people that have to do with fast or quickness, if you prime people that way, people tend to complete their sheet and walk quicker up to the administrator without even knowing that they're doing it. It's one of these things that it's our psychological instinct to do it this way. We don't even know that we're primed, but we are always primed in our minds. And the same thing is true with patience. What would happen, another study that they would do this, is the person would complete their sheet and then go up to the administrator, to turn in their sheet. And guess what? The administrator's on the phone. So she's like, hold on a minute. And the people that were primed with patience would be, no problem, I'll just wait. They would be more willing to wait. Vice versa, if they were primed with words like aggravation or annoyance or things like that, they would be more likely to be upset with the administrator and to have no patience at all. It just goes to show the power of our minds and our instincts. And hold on, once again, I'm just gonna have to move rooms real quick, just because I'm running out of power. So give me 1 second though. But the same thing is true with academic tests. If you prime yourself to have confidence in your academic ability, then you're more likely to do better academically. And the same thing goes with diets and body fat. The people that are trying to lose weight and they stick with their diets and they don't get upset and they stay confident, they tend to be more successful than those that don't. So kind of interesting. So what Gladwell says is to learn to prime yourself with positivity, and that way you'll be more successful. So anyways, that wraps up Gladwell. So I hope you enjoyed those few presentations. I just want to go over the little seagull. For a little bit here. Okay, now a lot of this stuff is review, so we don't have to spend a lot of time with this. But they talk about fragments. So on page 425, they say, What is the condition of Civil War battlefields today? National Geographic magazines addresses that question and gives a distressing answer. So in this case, the first part of it, the question, what is the condition of the Civil War battles today? Okay, that's fine. That's not a big deal. But then the next two, National Geographic magazine addresses that question and gives a distressing answer. That should probably be one sentence here. So you probably just want to delete that period and just continue this sentence here. Also, this is review. I know they talk about this a lot in the book, and we've had some exercises with comma splices, but just remember that comma splices are sentences with two independent clauses that you just have a comma that separates them. Um, the other thing too, I just want to point out about this example. This is right from your textbook, but you notice how they use nobody twice. Try to avoid using the same word twice in the same sentence. So in other words, try not to be repetitive. So instead of saying nobody is healthy in London and no one can be, I would say for that one. Okay, now let's are real papers, not from your class, but this is actually from Valencia. But let's take a look at some examples and how we could fix some of these. So what really is college level writing? Okay, that's a good opening hook, I guess. What is all the fuss about? All I did in high school was write. Now, what's wrong with high school here? Anyone want to take a guess? Yeah, exactly. It's capitalized. You don't need to capitalize high school. And also right here, we can see that there's a comma splice. All I did in high school was write. How can it all be different? So you would want to put maybe a semicolon right here, after write. And then, okay, I know the routine. There are only two styles, narrative and expository. I would actually say that you don't need to capitalize these two, but I guess it's okay in this case. 5 paragraphs that consist of topic sentences, theses, transitions, and evidence. Okay, good. In high school, all of my teachers would talk about was college. College this, college that, especially all my language composition teachers. But now as I get into college, my brain stopped functioning the day I was told that students had to differ between college level writing and high school writing. All in my first semester. Here we go. Now, in this case, I think he's probably being a little bit too informal with this language here. I mean, it's fine to talk about his personal experience in high school and so forth, but you want to avoid being too informal. Okay, he says, I am a college student. Now, what's wrong with this right here? Remember, yeah, exactly. You want to use I am, Hunter, exactly. So you want to avoid contractions unless it's a possessive. But yeah. And then, what do these teachers want from us as students? I thought I was mature enough to take college class and I have to go back to secondary school. What is really going on here? Um, and then he's talking about high school writing versus college level writing. And again, college does not need to be capitalized here. And then you notice how he keeps saying like, here we go, up here we go. Once again, this is an example where you don't want to keep using the same language over and over again. And also, in a way, he's maybe being a little bit too, I guess, insulting, if you will, to criticize college at this point. This is his first semester, but here we go. I will explain why college level writing will challenge me and get me to. the freedom to explore more culturally diverse literature. Okay, let's see here. In high school, there was a lack of exposure with regard to religion, culture, or ethnicities. Okay, I didn't change this, but for the last class, we fixed it, but it was originally like this. So what would be wrong with this? Well, you could see I just fixed it here, but this is an example of how you should use what they call an Oxford comma. So whenever you have a list of like 3 things, you would want to put a comma after the second one here. I know it's different if you read it in newspapers because they don't use the Oxford comma, but in college we do. Okay, as a Latina, I would have liked to have read more material related to a variety of cultures. It was not until after I graduated from high school that I had the ability to explore different authors and writings that spoke about different parts of the world. Once again, she uses different twice here. What are some ways that we could maybe fix this part? Okay, to explore different authors and writings that spoke about different parts of the world. Instead of saying different twice, she could use it once, but what would be, I guess, a synonym for different? Various, exactly. I was just about to say that, Cindy. Different authors and writings that spoke about various parts of the world. Exactly. A great example of the book, The Alchemist. Okay, here, remember that for titles, we would want to put this in italics. Now, I'll tell you that that on these slides that I'm using, it doesn't let me use italics. So you'll notice sometimes that I'll put in, like, I'll use quotation marks instead. But yeah, for titles, you want to put them in italics. Now here, okay, she says, in it, Paul Coelho speaks vastly about traveling through different continents, chasing a dream. I will tell you that this is fine because this is kind of, I think she's introducing the book for the first time here. In fact, yeah, she is. A great example is the book. Okay, so she's using the first and last name together for the first time. It's perfectly okay in this case to use the first and last name of the author the first time in the essay. After that, you don't need to put their first name. You could just put their last name. So you don't have to put Paul for the rest of the essay. Now you could even eliminate Paul even in the first time you use it. But if you are going to use the first name, just do it the first time only. And then after that, you can omit the first name. Okay, speaks vastly about traveling through different continents, chasing a dream. He paints a beautiful picture through his writing about places like Tarifa, a Spanish town. I think she wants to put a comma here. Tarifa, a Spanish town, and or at least a comma right there. Okay, exposing the reader to the beauty of the world abroad. This is so important in building the character of diversity. So she has another comma splice here. The first part is this, exposing the reader to the beauty of the world abroad. You could put something like maybe is, you could just get rid of this maybe, is so important in building character and diversity. Okay, maybe just a couple more here. And then I want to show you some examples of papers from your class, or not from your class, but I mean from last semester. Okay, let me go ahead here. Okay, showing respect with regards to the other side of a given issue is a necessary strategy for any serious writer. Okay, that's pretty good. One must not only present their own arguments, but also explain how the other half thinks. Okay, ultimately, research sources that are not considered academic will detract from your argument. I once cited from an article that was not a good source and it really damaged the credibility of my argument. Therefore, it is imperative that students find peer-reviewed journal articles to support their thesis statement. So I think I cited this example as something that was really good. I don't think there's much that we need to fix for this. So that would be an example of something that's really good. Now, though, let's take a look at a few other things here. Okay, this is paper, and it's okay, but let's start at the top here. What is one thing that's missing? It's pretty good, the heading and everything. One thing that's missing, though. You notice here, she's got the page number here, but you need her what before that? Yeah, exactly. Last name. I would also just suggest, I mean, it's pretty clear that what this paper is going to be about, analysis of boys and girls, but I would try to maybe make that a little bit more clever, if you will. Like what is the analysis of boys and girls? What's the ultimate analysis of boys and girls? But okay, we get the point. Somebody in the last class mentioned that this first paragraph here is pretty short, and I would tend to agree with it. The length of paragraphs is a little bit debated because, I mean, I know somebody in grad school who was a great writer and he used short paragraphs all the time. But in general, I would say that, yeah, for most people, I would like to have longer paragraphs. And let's kind of go through this a little bit here. Life would never been the same for the unnamed girl in this excerpt, right? I think she means except right here. Life would never have been the same for the unnamed girl in this except the winter of her 11th year of life. Boys and girls and their differences would certainly be shown to her. Her father was a farmer and skinner of foxes and fed them horse meat. I would just say that for these two sentences right here, these are probably fragments that you could probably combine. So just say like boys and girls and their differences would certainly be shown to her because her farmer was a skinner of foxes and fed them horse meat, something like that. What transpired when her father was to shoot two horses to feed the foxes would help her shape her as a girl, would help shape her as a girl and then a woman. Okay, pretty good thesis, I would say. Let's see here. The father used her as his right-hand man. Let's see, a couple other things I just want to point out here. Okay, right here. Now, first of all, Business News Daily is not really considered an academic source. So you could use that as a supplemental source. But aside from that, though, what's wrong with this, though? It needs to be italicized, right? Anytime you have a title, whether it's a newspaper, magazine, book, movie, it needs to be in italics. And then the other thing too, okay, other thing too, I forgot to mention it in the last class. You see how here she has her end of her quotation, her citation, I should say, and then she's got a period and then the name like this. This is wrong. You have to, what you need to do is you need to get rid of this period here and put it after like that. Okay, so I know that's a common mistake, but remember that the citation, including the author's name or page number, whatever it might be, that goes inside the period right here. And right here, instead of vice versas, it should be vice versa. So it should be something like that. Okay. Little things like this, they're not going to catch Microsoft Word, but peephole is actually one word here. And let's take a look here at some other things as well. Okay, rest of it looks pretty good. Um, the citations are off, though. I mean, that's technically incorrect. You would have, in this case, you would have the author, so Hedreen, comma, Cedra, period. Then you would have the name of the article. Then you would have Business News Daily in italic, or yeah, in italics. Then you would have the publication date. Okay, so remember that if you're not sure about citations, go on, in fact, go to on Seminole State, when you go to your main page and you go to the class page, there is a thing for OWL, Purdue, and that'll give you a whole bunch of writing tips and tips for citations and things like that. Okay, let's go to another one here. And also, I forgot to give you guys this. Take a look here, and I think I got enough power here to come back to the other room here, so give me 1 second. Okay, so let's do a little quiz here. Once again, this is just review. I mean, your textbook talks in the pages that you had to read for this week. A lot of it is review, but I know that your textbook talks about using the active voice versus passive voice. So let's just take a look at some of these here. And just at random, let's go ahead here and take some of these questions here. So let's take a look, for example, at number 9. How could you change this to the active voice? Instead of saying the vibrant colors in this painting are immediately noticed by the museum goers, how could you rearrange that into the active voice? What you could say is, exactly, Hunter. The museum goers noticed the painting's colors. How about this one, number 10? The story is presented in a dispassionate way by the author. Well, just again, a lot of times you just take the last part of the sentence and then put it in the first part of the sentence. So in this case, you would say, the author presents the story in a dispassionate way. How about something like this? The ball is hit straight into the bleachers by the batter. Well, how about just saying, the batter hit the ball straight into the bleachers? Something like that. So just little things like this. That's why I always recommend, when you get a paper and you complete it, hopefully you can complete it a day or two early, just put it aside for a little bit and then come back to it, and you'll notice little things that you could fix. Like, even this is like, take this for example. This is not a bad sentence grammatically. It makes sense. There's no misspellings. There are no grammar errors whatsoever, but just little ways that you can reword them would make them a little bit better. Okay, we'll take a look here at one more paper, and then we'll probably wrap it up for today and go over some last minute things here. But let's take a look at this one. Now, right off the bat, I mean, what are some things that are wrong with this? Yeah, first of all, yeah, the title's in bold. Remember, you don't need to put it in bold, so you would do that. Or actually, I guess it's not in bold, but it does look like it's bold, doesn't it? I don't know what font she's using for this. Let me just take a look here at something. Okay, well, yeah, first of all, you can see that she's using Arial font here. If you notice the cursor up here, Arial 18 font. That's incorrect. So let's just real quickly, we're not going to correct everything, but I just want to do this. Instead of using Arial font, you'll go to Times New Roman here. Where is it? I know it's here somewhere. There we go. Times New Roman, regular, and we're going to put everything into 12-point font like that. And then, yeah, we're not going to do the whole thing, but Hunter is absolutely right. There's no like class name, date, anything like that over here. There's no page numbers here. Yeah, no page numbers. Remember, you don't. It's not very complicated to do page numbers and to do the running head. You just simply click up here at the top. You would, I mean, you could try to space all the way over. I think it's just easier to just put in like, Smith, like your last name. And then, see, it's difficult for me because I don't use this. Let's see here if we can find it. See, I don't use Word this way. I just use it like in the web version. So it's a little bit different, I think. Okay, here we go. So you would go up here, you just go all the way to the right, you do right font, and then go to insert page number, which again, I don't use it this way most of the time. Not going to spend too much time on this, but you would insert page numbers. Yeah, offhand, I'm not. Just give me 1 minute more to try, and then I won't. But you get the idea. You would have page numbers here. Oh, okay, right here. So page numbers. Go to page numbers, and then it's going to ask you to format show number on the first page here, alignment to the right, so that it's going to be over here. And then also, I think you can. I think it's all set up to go here, so I think it's going to be perfect here. So do that. Then it's going to add your page numbers, and it should carry up. Now she didn't even do it. I mean, this should be longer, right? But let's just see if we do this here. Let's see if we add to this paper, and just see if it. Yep, it automatically will put 2 on here, so you don't have to keep doing this for every single page. It'll do it automatically. It'll carry over, so that's something that you don't have to worry about. And let's go through a couple other things too. Okay, so she says that Unwind is the greatest book that I've ever read. First of all, I think that she's not understanding what the quotations here are used for. Usually quotations, when you surround them with or you surround a word with them, usually means ironic. I don't think she's trying to be ironic here. I think she's really trying to say Unwind is the greatest book I've ever read. Well, a couple things. What's wrong with this first part right here? Since it's a title, it needs to be italicized. Remember, we don't use contractions, so it should be I have ever read. And okay, so the book is written by Neil Shusterman. That takes place, there shouldn't be a comma right here. Like, just tell us that, okay, the author that takes place in the future after a Second World War. The setting is the United States. So this is wrong right here. I don't know what the E is for. There, I think she means there, but I think this is supposed to be a T. So there were 3 factions: U.S. military, pro-choice, or pro-life. Probably pro-choice and pro-life don't need to be capitalized here. And of course, as you mentioned before, this is not double spaced. Also remember, anytime that you see a blue mark or a red mark, right click it, because in this case, it's going to tell you to add a comma, I'm sure. Yeah, so it'll give you the correction right there. Right here, I just want to emphasize again, remember, periods would go inside the quotation marks. So that's how it should look. Also, you notice that she didn't indent properly. The indentation should be more to the right. So let's do that. Okay, so something like that. Remember, right click, chosen. It would want you to add a comma there. when he turned 16. I think okay, comma, and get away. Also, one thing to point out here as well, runaway is not a misspelling because you can use runaway. If you're using runaway with no spaces, it means it's an adjective. So it would be like, for example, a runaway slave made his way over the river, or something like that. In this case, runaway is being used as an adjective. So in that case, it's one word. But run away, like if I were to put it like this, it's going to give you an error because it should be one word. So if you're going to say like to run away, literally to run away, it's going to have a space there. But if it's used as a adjective, then it doesn't need a space. And like I said, this is a little bit short. Just the last thing that I was telling the other class as well. And I thought it was in this paper, but I guess it's not. But one of the things, like I'm down here right now, let's just say, and don't pay any attention to what this content is. Let's just say that you start a sentence with a number. If your number is, let's say 15, if you just write this, 15 people opposed the whatever. Okay, this is incorrect because you always have to start a sentence with the word spelled out. So it would be like this, okay? That being said, if you were to use 15 in the middle of a sentence, anything that's 10 or more, or is it might be 11 or more. I'll double check that and get back with you next time. Actually, that's something that's a good question I just gave myself. But if you're using it in the middle of a sentence, so 15 people opposed the 15 whatever, that would be correct. So you always start the sentence though, spelling it out. It doesn't even matter if it's something like 222. You would still spell it out like 222. So that's how you would spell it, even though that looks a little bit weird. And in the middle of a sentence, of course, it would be something like this. It would be like 222 like that. But the first words of a sentence, you always spell it out. Okay, so I want to kind of stop here because this is about as far as we got with the last class. So I don't want to get ahead with one class or another. So we'll go ahead here and stop trying to think of some questions that they were asking me. I think we kind of answered, we went through them all. So do you guys have any questions? Okay, so Hunter, once again, I would just say go to the Purdue OWL page for that. I'll show you real quick. But the other thing too, though, remember that with our, let me go to it. Remember that if you go to your main page, so let's just go to the class page real quick, okay? So you'll notice down here, if you go to the courses page, we'll just go to this one. If you go down here, it will give you Purdue OWL here, and it'll take you there. And it will give you citations here somewhere. It would be this one, MLA, and citation tools right here. So let's see here. So this is the way that you would do it. Here's a book. This is for a book. Book here. This is the format that you would use. So it's author, last name, comma, first name. Then you have the name of the article. Then you have the source of the publication, in this case, Tulsa in Women's Literature. Remember, that's a title, so that should be in italics, comma, volume number, comma, issue number, comma, date, and then comma, pages. But the thing I just wanted to remind you, though, is that if we go to, I just go to the library this way. It just seems to be the easiest. But if you just go to, we'll just search for, I don't know, Christopher Columbus. Okay, let's just find an article real quick. A lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times what they'll do here, and gosh, give me 1 second here. Gotta go to, running out of battery again, so apologize. Don't want it to shut down, so give me 1 second here. Okay. So let's find an article real quick that you can find for PDF. So gosh, why are there not any PDF files? Okay, well, this is an ebook, but I wanted to find an article because most of you will be using articles. Why are these all here? Let me do this. Remember, you want to do this as well. I should have done this before. Articles from scholarly publications. And gosh, how could there not be any PDF? Okay, geez, what did I do last time? King Arthur. Okay, so let's take this. It won't do this all the time, but when you click on an article, and yeah, of course you do have to log in, so when you get to this page, a lot of times, not all the time, but go over here to click Cite, and they'll have all kinds of ways that you can cite. All you do is go down to MLA, and all you have to do is literally just copy and paste this. Just copy and paste that into your document, and so in this case, let's just say will automatically give you the right format, or it should. The only thing that you might have to do here is, I think the reason why it's doing that is just because she, in this essay, she had it cited, she was already using the wrong format, but remember that you use hanging indents here. So all you would have to do is usually hit enter here. This. Usually, the reason why it didn't do this like this already, you can see there's an extra space here, is because she already had it set up to do it that way. I don't know why. But anyways, though, that's how you would do that. Okay. Okay, so Cindy, if you were here last time, I said that you can do it that way, but you don't have to. You can do, I mean, also, the only thing is that you can't do a paper from another class or that the paper that you did last time. So you can basically do it on anything that you're interested in. So it's recommended that originally it was set up to do something from the textbook, but it doesn't have to be. Yeah, basically you can pick your topic. Okay, well, thanks everybody for attending. Have a good weekend, and we'll see everybody on Monday.